Gregory, President Joe Biden delivering a speech that a lot of his supporters have been waiting a long time to hear. He set out to deliver on those expectations today. The president and vice president set out to kill the filibuster once and for all. If those calls are heeded in the Senate, we will bring that breaking news to you. I want to start with you, Claire McCaskill, and this framing of the speech. This president made clear, he said this: I support changing the Senate rules in whatever way they need to be changed to protect the majority rule. Do you know how many people out there watching in the public support that? 57% of Democratic voters support the majority rule, and 15 percentage points more on the Republican side support majority rule. This president, this White House, has the public behind him, has the base of his party behind him, has the coalition that sent him and the vice president to the White House behind him. Is this really a Manchin conversation at this point, Claire?
Well, and I thought that's what was really important about this speech, Nicole. And by the way, let me not go any further before I say welcome, Simone. We're so glad that you're with us, and I look forward to many great conversations with you. And she was pointing out before the speech began, and I think it's really important to underline this. I get really tired, and I don't mean any disrespect to the great journalists on the panel. I get really tired of the coverage over the in-party fighting. I mean, so there were a couple of groups that didn't show up to the speech today. What Biden did today was say, this is about the 16 Republicans that voted to extend the voting rights bill in 2006 that are still in the Senate. What happened to them? Where did their spines go? Where did their care and concern about our democracy and the ability to vote go? What is their excuse for refusing to allow debate on a bill that is as fundamental as this? So let's forget about for a minute, as Joe Biden said, let's forget about for a minute what groups didn't show up today or who's mad at who within the Democratic Party. And let's focus the attention where it belongs, on those 16 Republicans that are hiding under their desk and allowing democracy to crumble around them.
Well, Claire, I did my homework. I have their names. I mean, the one great journalist on this panel, though, is the one reporter who has the destruction of democracy at the hands of a lie, of an election fraud, as his beat. And I think Nick Corsini doesn't need me to defend it, but let me just point out that the Democrats who've been upset with President Joe Biden are the ones who sent him there. And a lot of them show up on this show, and they're not reporters. They're important parts of his base. They include the Reverend Al Sharpton, who was in the audience. And I wonder, Nick, what you heard in this speech that you think sort of takes some of the air out of the balloon, that pent-up angst, for lack of a better word, for this president to show this fire on this issue.
Well, I think two things that really stood out to me was the first, and what we expected, was that he was done dancing around the issue of whether he supported a carve-out for the filibuster or not. He came out and said we need to change the Senate rules in order to pass federal voting rights legislation. It wasn't a clear cut, we need to get rid of the filibuster completely. It was just about voting rights. And I think that clear, undeniable stance by the president was one thing in particular that a lot of voting rights activists and a lot of civil rights leaders have been just waiting to hear. And I think part of the reason that some didn't show up was because they hadn't heard it yet. It had been, over a year since the January 6th assault on the Capitol. It had been almost 10 months since Georgia Republicans passed their sweeping voting law. And so that was part of the reason that I think some of the goodwill had soured amongst key parts of his base. I think the second thing that the president said that will really, I think, appease some of those frustrated groups was a direct call, maybe not by name, but to some of the Democratic holdouts about changing the filibuster, particularly Senator Joe Manchin, Senator Kyrsten Sinema. He made those comparisons to 51 presidents and how difficult it can be. But then later, when he was saying, who do you stand, whose side are you on? Is it, President Lincoln, and is it former civil rights leaders, or is it Bull Connor? And that, I think, dichotomy is really going to play well with some of these voting rights groups who've really been looking for the president to use his bully pulpit against members of his own party who've been holding out on this.
Well, and Michael Steele, to Claire's point, I mean, he really called BS on the Republicans. I was in the White House in 2006 when President George W. Bush signed the extension of the voting rights legislation, and these are the 16 Republicans who voted, and I believe showed up, some of them, for the bill signing. Senator Mitch McConnell, Senator Grassley, Shelby, Crapo, not sure how to say that one, Collins, Burr, Crapo, Graham, Thune, Cornyn, Blackburn, Blunt, Boozman, Capito, Moran, and Wicker all voted for the 2006 reauthorization. The president also very effectively invoked former Republican presidents, President Reagan and President George W. Bush. What is the sort of prospect of maybe moving Manchin by showing how extreme and radicalized this version of the Republican Party is?
Well, I don't know about that. I think everybody knows how extreme and radicalized this version of the Republican Party is. It's no secret at this stage. Manchin works with them every day. He's had the private conversations with them that, he knows that they're not going to go but an inch away from McConnell and no further. So this fight has always been from the very beginning of this administration about what this administration would do with the politics. And today, starting probably last week with his speech on the January 6th occasion, the president decided to engage politically and decided to actually call out the BS and call the bluffs of not only his political opponents on the right, but also within his own party. I understand that, the politics of not wanting to show up. You think you're going to embarrass the president, but guess what? He's got the bully pulpit, and he used it to knock some heads today. And God bless him for that. It's about time. I've been sitting here wondering for the past year, when you're going to do the politics. Because this is never about some big policy discussion. It's about the politics. And McConnell knows I got the corner on politics right now because the Democrats won't or don't know how to use it against me. So we'll see. There were a couple of things real quick that jumped out to me in the speech that are important. One, at the beginning, confront hard truths about ourselves. That message is important to drive home because what's at stake here is us. We talk about it in terms of voting. We talk about it in terms of rights and all of that in the Constitution. But at the end of the day, it's us. So the president now saying, folks, I'm going to take the mirror. I'm going to hold it up to you. And I'm going to let you see yourselves. Because that's what this is about, us. The second part of it was, the fact that he talked about the defeated president, and I love that term. It was going to drive Trump nuts, referring to him not as the former president, but as the defeated president. I think that's good. But I think he needs to connect all of this, and I think he's beginning to do that, Nicole, with the country. And to Claire's point about, how this group or that group doesn't participate or not there and how the press covers that. Don't get distracted by that. Have them come to your space because you're defining the conversation. And I think the president is finally beginning to get his sea legs on that in this moment. And let me just give a quick shout out to my girl, Simone. Welcome. It's good to have you in the family.
Simone, I'm coming to you. This was an incredible speech by the president showing the fire on the issue where a lot of the fire is in his coalition. I hate when people talk about this as just a base issue. This is the coalition that sent him there, that cared about democracy, that may or may not have been a Democrat, but saw Donald Trump as undemocratic. So I think the coalition has been waiting a long time for this speech. But this was a fiery speech by the vice president, and I want to read some of the lines that I think people will be talking about for a long time from her. And this is a lot of what Nick captures in his reporting, how normal it's become for state after state after state to pass voter suppression laws for ways of voting for which there was no fraud. I learned from Nick's reporting that some of the things that have been banned are the most secure ways that people voted in 2020. The vice president called out the normalcy and the complacency of denying people the right to vote. How long has she wanted to give a speech like the one she gave today, Simone?
I think the president and vice president have been ready to say what they have been, frankly, saying to senators and members of Congress and the activist community for months. People who have met with the vice president, people who have met with the president, and that includes all the legacy civil rights groups, a number of the activists on the ground across the country, the vice president and her travels from Ohio to Georgia to Detroit to Chicago to in California. She has met with voting rights advocates and activists across the country, and their message has been consistent and clear. As the president said a couple of of months ago, look, we have to get some of these infrastructure bills done and passed, but we stand staunchly in agreement on voting rights. I think the important part of what the president and vice president did today is, yes, they're fiery passion, but they made it plain, and they called folks to the carpet, and they applied pressure, and that is what is needed going into this weekend, where it is expected that a vote is going to happen. I've texted with senators, I've asked, like, well, what is really going on? Are we going to get a vote? They have told me a vote is coming, and people, United States senators, need to go on the record. The question really is, in my opinion, Nicole, what happens after Monday? What happens after the question has been called, people are on the record, and let's just say the vote doesn't pass? What are activists and advocates and organizations looking for from the president and vice president? What kind of pressure will be applied there, not just on Democrats, but on Republicans? Because this isn't an issue, our democracy isn't a partisan issue, it's an American issue. It's just crazy to me that this has become a partisan game.
Well, but here we are. This is who we are. And I mean, Claire, you called out the Republicans. The president called out the Republicans. The truth is, the Republicans stand for voter suppression in the name and in the disguise of election integrity, because their base believes it. Bill Barr couldn't find any to investigate and prosecute. Chris Krebs, lifelong Republican, said it was the most secure election in our country's history. But that doesn't matter in the fact-immune Republican base. And I wonder if you can pick up on what Simone's talking about. Is there a plan B? And maybe the most Biden line of the whole speech was to say, I've been having quiet talks, the likes of which Simone's talking about. President and vice president have been meeting with stakeholders. The president got, I think, the loudest response when he said, I'm done being quiet.
Yeah, I think this is kind of him putting a flag in the ground and saying, this is where I'm going to fight. I think it's a smart fight to make. There is no one in America who thinks there's something insidious about giving people that are in line to vote water. That's the kind of stuff they do in, like, weird countries that nobody's ever heard of. We don't do that in America. We don't punish people for providing water to people in line. That's the kind of stuff that we need to be front and center talking about as we go into 2022. And I do think that if the vote fails, this is going to have to be a moment where everyone does a gut check and rallies and doesn't go home and say, we're not going to participate because they couldn't get it done. It just means we have to elect more Democrats. We have to keep working this. We have to keep registering voters, as Michelle Obama announced over the weekend, that she plans on working to register another 1 million voters next year. So we can't give up. But they've done a good job, Nicole. They just did a poll in my state over the weekend in a new congressional district in southwest Missouri of Republican primary voters. 64% of the people polled said Donald Trump had won the election.
Yeah, I mean, if the lies are what they're feeding, it's what the Republicans are eating. Nick Corsinati, Claire McCaskill, Michael Steele, Simone Sanders, a huge welcome from all of us to the MSNBC family. We're so glad you're here. Thank you all for starting us off and spending some time with us this hour. The next hour of Deadline White House starts after a short break. Don't go anywhere.